I've always been fascinated by how the human brain works. Why do we make the decisions we make? Why does one person struggle with mental illness while another doesn't? In the world of psychology, there are more questions than answers. I wanted to get to the bottom of some of my questions, so I decided to dig into a psychological topic that I've always found fascinating: denial. Let's start by clarifying what denial is. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines denial as 1. Refusal to satisfy a request or desire. 2. Refusal to admit the truth or reality of something. 3. Refusal to acknowledge a person or a thing. 4. The opposing by a defendant of an allegation. And 5. A defense mechanism in which confrontation with a personal problem or with reality is avoided by denying the existence of the problem or reality. It's the last definition I wanted to explore. Have you ever tried to tell someone a fact only to have them refuse to believe it? You could have irrefutable proof, and that person would do the mental equivalent of closing their eyes and putting their fingers in their ears. Anyone who has a loved one struggling with addiction is likely intimately acquainted with denial and how frustrating it is to confront a person in denial, only to have all of your facts and arguments fall on deaf ears. How does denial have such a stranglehold on some people? To understand denial, we need to go back to the founder of denial, Freud. No, not that Freud. This Freud. Sigmund Freud did hypothesize that there were 3 types of denial: simple denial, minimization, and projection. But it was his youngest child, Anna Freud, who really dug into the world of denial. In 1934, she published a book titled The Ego and Mechanisms of Defense. This book was the first time it was suggested that denial was a way to protect our ego. Anna didn't define ego the way we might, as a sense of self-importance, but rather she considered ego to be our acceptable picture of who we are. Denial is one of the 10 defense mechanisms we use to help us protect the image we have of ourselves. It's why someone who spends more money than they're earning refuses to believe they're financially irresponsible, or why someone who keeps getting into car accidents thinks they're a good driver. Let's talk about how denial connects to specific situations. The word denial pops up a lot when we're talking about addiction. People struggling with drug addiction tend to be prone to denial, which is how they're able to keep using drugs even though they have negative consequences from their drug usage. As a bystander, we can see the addict denying their problem, and it can be difficult to understand how they're unable to see the truth that's right in front of their eyes. An addict's brain thinks it's protecting itself. Addiction can be a source of shame and low self-worth, and often addicts turn to substances to help them avoid difficult emotions. Denial allows them to continue staying in that bubble, to continue viewing a picture of themselves that they're comfortable with, while avoiding feeling uncomfortable emotions, shame, and low self-worth. Let's talk about an aspect of denial that fascinates and frustrates me: confirmation bias. Confirmation bias happens when a person chooses to only accept information that confirms their beliefs. When presented with information that goes against their view, they ignore or reject it. But here's the tricky thing: we don't usually realize that we're doing it. How is that possible? It's because of the vast amount of information our brain is constantly taking in. Our brains are continually taking in information, examining it, and then cataloging it. To make the information easier to retrieve, the brain creates shortcuts. These shortcuts create biases and stereotypes. It's one reason why everybody has biases, even if they believe they don't. When we talk about confirmation bias in the political world, things can get heated. Politicians often pick and choose information that supports their agendas or their party's stance. Their supporters believe the selected information they're fed, and when they're confronted with facts that go against what they've been told, they refuse to accept it. An evolutionary theory as to why this happens has to do with survival. A long time ago, our ancestors learned that groups that work together are much better equipped to survive than groups that are comprised of selfish individuals. So we not only choose to believe the group we've chosen to follow, we often try to prove people from the opposing group wrong, even if we're wrong ourselves. Does this mean that denial is always a bad thing? No. Denial can help us to deal with difficult emotions and can give us hope. Denial can help a person diagnosed with terminal cancer to fight back against their disease, and can give someone involved in a traumatic experience time to process what happened. Anna Freud was right in stating that denial is necessary for us to function. It only becomes a problem when it prevents us from taking action, like someone who experiences shortness of breath and chest pain and denies getting help, or someone who refuses to acknowledge that their child has a substance abuse problem and continues to give them money. So in all this research, what did I learn? I learned that denial is an integral part of the human psyche. It's something we all have, and it's partially responsible for our biases and our prejudices. And I also learned it's important for everyone to take a step back and recognize that people who are in denial likely don't realize that they are. Before you approach your loved one about their denial, take a deep breath and ask yourself if it's vital that you confront them or not. If someone is struggling with an addiction or are denying a health condition, approaching them with concern and support could help them recognize the truth of their situation and may motivate them to get help. But arguing with someone about their confirmation bias or trying to help them see the other side of the story will likely only end with you and your loved one in a 3-day verbal battle on Facebook.